Hi, how are you? You good? Yeah. You're on the floor as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Did you start at work tomorrow? So, do you still?
Yeah, we drive.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah, we'll be here like 5 hours.
What do you do, you guys, for work?
She will.
On Sunday,
Are you like a tour guide, like hiking, or is it? Yeah.
We can all
How much time to reflect?
All the country people come from?
No, just practice. No, next week. You come from where?
I live in Portugal, but I'm Belgian. But it's fun when they are so you have people from all over the world. It's
It's a good place to live.
It's just exciting to see so many different people from different origins come here. Hopefully they get interested. It's when we get personal proof that we get.
Can we go into it up? Send it down. Somebody flog your seat?
Poor Echo, he was broke in the middle, didn't it? So, Elsa, is there a reason why you're in the seat?
because I need to be up high to take photos.
Can you give someone else your seat? Is that okay?
To Andy. Oh yeah. To Andy. Give it to Andy. Next to Yvette. Andy, what one? It's too big, that one, Andy, no? Yeah.
And, yeah. All right, what we'll probably do is go for about an hour and a half to about 2:30, and then we'll have another break, and then we'll probably 3 to 4 if you can bear it. Is that all right? All right, now remember the subjects were, so I want to start, so microphone needs to just be moved up the back there, right up the back. So your primary subject is? God? Beautiful, I love that subject.
What is an entity?
An entity is a thing, a person. So perhaps we need to define it in terms of language barriers and everything. So a person's not the right way to call it, because a person would tend to indicate like a human, but we're not saying he's human. He has personality. He's got personality. Right? He's got a nature. She is also self-aware. She existed before the universe was created, so the creator of all things. One of her primary qualities is love. So you could say God is the personification of love, but love itself is not God. Love is one of God's qualities. Does that make sense to you? So you can say that the soul, you can say that God is the great oversoul of the universe. The soul being the entity that is the personage of God, if you like. And And the qualities God has, so God has, you could say, attributes and qualities. Right? So love is an attribute of God. It's a part. It is a part of God, but it's not the whole of God. So when people say love is God, that is actually incorrect. Right? But it is appropriate to say God is love. So let me look at those two statements. If I say love is God, I'm saying that a feeling is God. And that's not actually true. If I say God is love, or you could say God is the personification of love, that is actually true. God is love in that one of the greatest of God's feelings is love. But love is just one of many feelings God has. So God also has feelings relating to wisdom, power, and lots of other qualities actually God has. So love is just one of the qualities of God, not the only quality of God. Make sense? Yeah. So God has, you could say, these attributes and qualities really are a part of God's personality and nature. So God does have personality, and when you connect to God, you start feeling God's personality, feeling what God loves. In other words, you start feeling what God loves and what God doesn't like very much as well. God has dislikes as well, things that he does not agree with, and a lot of human creations God does not agree with. One of those creations is sin. Sin is a human creation. In other words, every time we act out of harmony with love, we are sinning. God didn't design us to do that. We chose to do that. God designed us with the possibility of doing it, but we don't have to do it. So you could say God, as the designer, designed the human also, which brings us to the human soul thing there, right? God designed the human to be able to communicate with God. So God actually has the ability to communicate with all of God's children as well. God also established all of the laws of the universe. So you could say every law God created is an expression of his personality. Right? God nurtures. Many of you don't feel this yet, maybe. God has compassion for the human condition. God has understanding for the human condition because God created humans. God knows your potential, and also God designed your soul to receive parts of God's nature to yourself, but only if you ask.
Thank you. I have a question I'm not sure I'm going to be able to completely express.
Yep.
It has to do with emotions and God. Let's say going into the emotion, into the sensation. If I go into a sensation so much within that it starts to dissolve, and I can be within with the emotion, and the emotion, staying with the emotion the entire way, and it starts to dissolve into like an expansiveness within. Is that a way to access or communicate with God?
Well, let's first, I suppose by asking your question, we need to see the relationship, don't we, between God and the human soul.
I'm just going to paraphrase the question for the recording because it's quite quiet. So,
Yeah.
and you can correct me if I get it wrong. But it's basically, am I connecting to God, or is it a way to connect to God if I go within and I be with an emotion fully, kind of like allow it, and then it seems to dissolve into this other awareness?
Yes.
Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, the fundamental answer is no, it's not God, but it is your soul that you're now connecting to rather than your mind. And it's going to feel a lot different than connecting to your mind. So let's just talk about the human soul a bit. So you remember that's those subjects, won't you? Little drumming into you over the course. Human soul, of which you are one half. What's your sexual attraction?
Male.
Male. So the other half of you is a male. Right? You're female. You have two bodies. The female. I'll draw you with a dress, just so we can tell the difference. Physical body, spirit body, physical body. Spirit body. This is your soul. This is the thing God created. Your emotions exist here. And they get expressed through connections that occur between your soul and your bodies. When you tune into your emotion and allow yourself to feel the emotion more and more and more, you are starting to recognize that you are not these things. You are this thing. So in that place, the soul is much bigger than the bodies. It also has much higher capacities. It has greater senses than the bodies have in every area. It has the ability to communicate beyond the speed of light, which the bodies don't actually have initially. And so when you start feeling into your soul, you will start feeling some of these sensations that are in your soul. So when you did what you described was you connecting to that emotional part of you. You follow me?
I do.
That is not God. That is you.
Connect to God and then how would you connect to God?
Good question. The way you connect to God is by in that space where you're feeling your feelings, you start having a longing to feel God's feelings. And what will happen is that there'll be feelings that enter you from God, which will then you will be able to tell the difference, that it's different to your own feelings. Right? And in that process, that's what we call prayer. Prayer is this longing that you experience, a desire, a passion, a longing to have some of God's feelings enter you. And primarily the feeling of love enter you from God.
So it's predominantly emotional rather than I'm praying from my mind.
Spot on. In fact, if you pray from your mind, God doesn't hear it at all. He sees it, but he does not respond to it.
Thank you.
Make sense?
Perfect.
He sees it because he can see everything that he created. And actually, when you have a thought is also a substance that exits you. In the spirit world, you see thoughts exit people as packages. You can almost see the package. And you can also see sort of like an email package, a thought, that you see other people receiving. And you can also feel in yourself that you're receiving them too. Those thoughts can be transmitted to the minds of other humans, but that's not how humans communicate with God. How humans communicate with God, and God is there's only this one method, and that is you have to be in your soul feelings. In other words, you have to be emotionally feeling, attuned emotionally, and then desire in that space to have a longing for an interaction with God. That's a prayer. No other thing is a prayer. That is the only prayer that God responds to. Now, there is other longing that the human soul can also develop. So this human soul has two potential forms of longing. One is a longing for love. And what happens with love when you long for it? There is a conduit. It's like a wormhole almost, you could describe it as. But by the way, wormholes are limited to the universe. But it is a conduit. And the way you perceive it as a spirit is like a beam of light that goes way beyond anywhere you can see in the universe, which is from God herself. And you see it as this beam of light coming to the person through their crown chakra when the longing is formed. And this is like a conduit that when you have a longing emotionally, this conduit is opened up and God can transmit emotions, God's emotions, which are mostly love, when you long for love, And God, by the way, God is willing to share other feelings too from God, but we'll talk about those later. But with love being the first one you really need to understand the other things, love is the thing to long for the most. And when you long for it, this conduit opens up and the love flows through the middle of the conduit into you. So it's like whenever you long with your heart, with your feelings, with your emotion, that is what God responds to. The conduit opens up and love will be received. It must be in harmony with truth in order to be received. So it has to be sincere. You can't fake it. You can't sort of fake it till you make it, that kind of thing. It has to be a real feeling that you actually experience. So that's how you receive love from God. You can also receive truth from God using a different method. Truth from God is God built into the human soul. So this thing here, not the bodies, but the soul, God built a mechanism called the conscience. And the conscience is a mechanism via which God can share truth with you. The same thing applies. It has to be emotionally experienced. You have to want the truth. You have to long for it. You have to want to seek it. And that's the law of God passing anything to you. It has to be based on sincerity. It has to be real. It has to be something that you really feel. But you can feel a longing for God's truth, and God will share that truth with you. So, you can even ask God about God. You can ask God about how the universe is designed. Now, there are some limitations of truth, and that is God can only share with you the amount of truth that you're able to interpret at the time, and that's going to depend on how much of God's love you've received. So, a person who's received very little or none of God's love won't be able to understand truths that there are spheres in the spirit world. So the human soul, if I just briefly explain, is the first 7 spheres of the spirit world. The 6th sphere is the place where the perfect human exists. So when you're perfected as a human, that's where you will live. If you haven't received anything from God, that is also where you will stay. And that human is unable to understand anything that belongs to the 7th sphere unless they've received God's love. All right? If you receive God's love, you can understand things in the 7th sphere that you didn't understand before, because actually all understanding is not intellectual. It has to be emotional. So very important to understand that when you're connecting to that place you mentioned, you're starting to recognize you have a soul. And that's this expansive thing that is very, very different to your mind, very different to your body, different to your brain. And you start recognizing that, and then after a while you can start developing its senses more and more. Right? So the soul has all these senses that, unless you develop them, they will remain dormant. The possibility of having them will be there, but unless you develop them, they'll remain undeveloped. Yep. And one of those senses is how to use the conscience, and the other is how to connect and receive God's love. They're the primary ones needing to be developed for all others to be developed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep. So when you're connecting to yourself and feeling that expansive feeling, you are feeling yourself more, which is great. It's not a thing to avoid doing, it's a good thing. But you're not yet connecting to God. When you're in that place, you can have a longing to receive God's love, and you will feel God's love enter you from outside of yourself, and it'll probably overwhelm you emotionally. You'll probably start crying and start getting even more emotional if it happens. And initially, that's the case for all humans, because we're in a condition of sin, and so there's confrontation between God's love and the sin that exists within us. And that usually causes most people to cry. And that will probably continue until you're in the 8th sphere of the spirit world, actually. Yeah. Every time you receive God's love up until the 8th sphere, usually you will cry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just in front of you, yes. Subject matter,
God.
God.
Does God or has God ever learned anything?
This is a very interesting question, because what God has shared with us and spirits who have been in a similar, had a similar history to ourselves, is that God's nature is infinite in its nature. So in other words, every quality is developed to an infinite degree, which would tend to suggest that God never had to learn anything, and that God doesn't learn things because God already knows everything. By being infinite in nature, it automatically presumes, infinity presumes that he knows everything, that anything that could be known. Now, people ask me how that can be the case. I got no idea.
Like the first time he created a human.
Yeah, that's right.
Knew exactly how
He knew exactly how to design it, and in fact, there's humans now on 7 different planets, and he created them all the same. And why did he do that? I don't know. He must like what he designed the first time, and then just repeated it, right?
Is it like a giant computer model where you can tell every possibility?
That's right. God's the greatest mathematician in the universe, obviously, to an infinite degree. He's also the greatest scientist. So everything in harmony with God is also going to be in harmony with maths and science, right? So this is where, when religion tells you, maths and science not really in harmony with God, but that's not true. It's going to be always in harmony with maths and science. But again, there's a lot of maths and science that humans don't know that are to do with dimensional space and dimensional existence and all these things that are purveys of the human soul rather than of the human mind, right? The human mind exists in the spirit body. The human soul is a completely different entity than your mind. And so when you receive things from God, there's going to get to a point where your mind will no longer be able to understand them, but your soul will. So in other words, when you're emotional, you understand them, but when you're intellectual, you won't. Right? Then on top of that, there'll also, because God is infinite, you're finite, there's a whole heap of things, even in that place, you're not going to understand. Because God's infinite and you're finite, there's only a certain amount of information that can be given to a finite creature compared to what's infinite. So you also need to come to realize that no matter how long you try to discover more about God, you'll always be discovering more. It will never be something that you'll ever say, I know everything about that now. And that makes sense, because if you knew everything about God, you would be God.
Are we inside God right now?
Are we inside God?
Yeah.
Well,
Is everything inside?
You got to remember that everything God created is outside of God as an entity. However, it appears to the people who have progressed to the union condition, they've discovered, obviously, there's 7 souls that have progressed to that condition. It appears to those of us who have that there are whole heaps of things or information available that are only available when you reach a certain condition. So when it comes to discovering everything about God's nature, it's going to be a progressive thing. And what was the other question you asked?
Are we inside God?
When it comes to moving towards God, we can't be inside God, because if you have sin in you, right? So pretty much everyone on earth has sin in them at the moment, right? So if you got sin in you, nothing about God contains sin. So therefore, God can't contain you while you're in sin. You follow? However, in terms of physical dimensional space, everything that God created is in different dimensional space than God herself. Because it doesn't matter how many, at the moment we've discovered 36 dimensions. It doesn't matter what you look at in all those dimensions, you won't find God. You'll find parts of God's nature in God's creations, but you won't actually find God herself. So she exists outside of those dimensions. Now, even the creation of dimensional space laws govern dimensional space. So that should also tell us that God is not bound by dimensional space either. That's a scientific truth about God. So there are a whole series of scientific truths about God, and then there's a whole series of truths about like God's personality, God's emotions, because remember God has emotions. There's a whole series of truths about God's emotions and God's creations, God's qualities, of which love is one. But there's an infinite number of God's qualities. Love is the dominant one that God's sharing with humans. But there's other ones of God's qualities. You become aware that God is a personage in the sense that you can communicate, you can talk and receive, talk and receive. But God can communicate with every one of her children, and already there's something like, well, around those children that have incarnated, there's over 600 billion that have incarnated at this stage, and on all the different Earths that have been in the process of handling the incarnation process, of which there's 7. So God's had 600 billion children incarnate already, and God can communicate with every single one of them individually, independently of a communication with another one. God does not communicate to you via anyone else. So the whole concept, the Christian concept that God needs a mediator, some go-between between you and God is false. God has the ability to communicate via the conscience to every child, and the ability to communicate or for you to receive qualities from God, like love, only when the child asks. All right? Truth can be shared with the child whether the child asks or not, ironically. But if the child asks, they're in a state of receiving the truth. Obviously, you can't receive it unless you're really in a state of asking. But love can't be transmitted to the human without asking. Without the human asking. Yeah. Any more questions about God?
Some down here.
So maybe across we'll work our way down. And maybe if we have the other mic down here, we'll start here first. God. It's about God.
Yes.
Yep.
Just need to put the microphone close to you, just close to your chin.
Just
I
on
don't
the
know
chin.
if it's God. So I wanted to ask from you. At the beginning, I missed something. I wanted that you first, before I really can listen to you, that you introduce yourself. Who are you? Because it's not a small fact what you are saying about yourself.
Yep.
And I know there are a lot of videos, but I did not want it to see. You say that you are Jesus, the reincarnated Jesus here in front of me, and she's Maria.
I'm not reincarnated though.
No, but that was in the description. Just I wanted to know from where you are speaking, just to understand, because it's very beautiful what you are saying.
Yeah.
But for me, it's still now just an intellectual level. But I really wish that you somehow show me God.
Well, I think it's two things you're really asking, isn't it? You'd like us to say who we are.
Yes.
So Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Yes.
But are you also saying you'd like us to show you?
To prove that.
Okay, no, that
Because
I
that's-
don't want to prove.
Yeah.
Then I just, how come it that you wake up? Did you have a glimpse? Because I was also in Bethlehem. I went extreme. It was my biggest wish to meet Jesus in this life.
Yep.
And now maybe it's the opportunity that I have it.
Yep. But yes, no, I
But-
understand that. Who else feels this way? Is there any of us that?
Nobody
No?
else?
I think most of you are lying actually to yourselves.
sure.
You know.
Well, I don't know if they're maybe not as passionate as you about knowing, but
I'm
Yeah.
really passionate.
Yeah.
Nothing else interested me. From where are you speaking?
Yeah.
Because if I then
Yep.
and I really open myself.
Well, no. There's what I would suggest is this: as you're not really see, Mary and I can say I'm Jesus and Mary's Mary. We haven't reincarnated. What's happened is we've connected to two bodies. We've gone through this process a second time. The first time it was automatically, just like it has been for all of you now. But the second time, you make some decisions doing this because you're in a union state and you're conscious of this state and you make some decisions. So for Mary and I, around 19. we reach this condition of union in the soul union state where both of us consciously reached union at about 1935. So we're talking just less than 100 years ago. We waited for a group of other souls to reach the same condition, which took until 1963. And once that happened, we all decided, there's 7 souls totally, 14 people, who all decided to come back to Earth. Now, I can say that, but in the end, there's going to have to be some evidence, isn't there, for people to believe it. Yep. Now, there's 2 ways to obtain evidence. One way is by obtaining evidence from God about that. The other way is by waiting until Mary and I can provide enough evidence. Does that make sense to you? One way is that you can talk to God and say, is that true? And receive information from God about whether it's true or not. You can also receive love from God, like I've just explained in this process. And through that love, you can receive the truth about who we are and whether you should even listen to us. You could even do that.
I wish to listen. That's why I must say I not totally understand what you're saying, but I feel it, and that is more important. Now I feel the beauty you were speaking to me.
Yep.
That I appreciate.
Yeah. So, but see, what I'm saying though is for you to have enough evidence in your heart to actually do what we're suggesting to do with your life, that requires quite a lot of faith, doesn't it? That what we're saying is true.
Yes.
So I agree with that. Now, there's 2 ways you can obtain that evidence. One is from God herself directly.
Mm-hmm.
The other is by waiting until we present more evidence.
Okay.
But the problem with waiting is that, let's say it takes another 15 years for us to present. We've already presented 15 years of evidence already, more than that. But if we, let's say, for there to be enough evidence for you, it might take another 15 years, and then you've just wasted 15 more years waiting. So what we would suggest is that you do this thing, connect to God via the desire for love from God and via the desire from truth from God, connect to God, and then God can inform you now or over the next few years whether we are who we claim to be. And in the process of doing that, you can then come to trust us more now, not wait until we've presented enough evidence to sort of establish our proof or that we are who we claim to be. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, some of you will choose to wait, and I get that, It's probably not what I would do, because in the first century I had the same to make decisions about what did I want to connect to God or not. And my desire was connecting to God's better than doing anything else. So I might as well go ahead and do that. And then I had to discover, how do I connect to this God? How do I feel God's love? How do I get truth from God? And I had to learn these attributes of the soul, the conscience by which you receive truth, and through the Holy Spirit receiving love. I had to learn them for myself. And I didn't have anybody claiming to be Jesus, although there were some other people claiming to be the Messiah when I came to earth. But I didn't have anybody saying, he's Jesus and I should listen to him. I had to do the discovery of these things myself. And this is what I'm recommending for you guys to do now. Don't delay that. Don't put that off. Even if you have some level of mistrust of myself and Mary, don't put off the experiment of discovering who God is.
And would Mary love me also if I would love you?
What kind of
I
love?
would like to know the deepest of your love.
Well,
If I would fall in love in Jesus, would you love me?
I would love you, but
But would
he
you
probably wouldn't.
what kind of love
yeah.
are you?
It wouldn't reciprocate that
Okay,
love.
that I'm-
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
No, that I wanted to ask.
the kind of love Mary and I have is a soulmate love.
Yes.
So we are
But that's
halves.
the problem with me.
Well, you're not my soulmate.
That's why.
You have a soulmate somewhere else.
You think that we are just a band.
Just what? Sorry.
one soulmate. So nobody
Yeah, no,
else can.
we definitely just have one.
Okay.
Just have one.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, that I
so,
wanted to
so
understand.
your
It's a
romantic,
concept for me, so that
Yep.
I can understand.
yep.
that I can
So
follow.
your romantic interest
No,
should
it's not romantic.
should be towards your soulmate,
Okay.
and your desire for God should
It's
be
just
towards
an
God.
example. It can happen.
Sorry.
It can happen. God can do everything, so it can happen that okay. I
What,
just
what
want
can
this
happen?
to
What can
happen.
happen?
It
I
can
know, I
happen
can-
that you feel deep love also towards somebody else. That I wanted to ask, how would Mary reply in that place? Because just I really want to understand the love, what you are speaking.
Yeah. So it's very.
Would she be jealous or something? It's not romantic. I just wanted to understand the love that you are speaking. How much this love tolerates.
Well, Mary and I are one person.
Yes.
We're one soul.
Yes.
So I would question as to why you feel that you would need to love me and not love Mary.
I would love her.
That's right.
Yeah.
So why would she then be?
No, I just wanted to know from where do you answer this question. I really don't want to better more. Thank you very much.
You understand?
Yeah, I think I
I really
understand.
don't get
No worries.
Yeah.
Good. Any more
Back to
about God?
Manu.
Manu?
Yep.
So Manu's
So I wanted to ask, yeah, about God.
Yep.
I have a few questions, but one would
Just
be.
hold the mic, thanks.
Yes, one would be, like you're saying, like, where, God is everywhere,
No,
everything.
no.
No, okay.
God is not in the universe.
Okay, so, and where is the universe?
Well, the universe is the universe has been constructed. The universe that has been discovered so far, I should say, too, is constructed in such a manner. So now we're not asking questions about God, but we do need to know. Like,
Because I need to understand where, okay, so if God is not everything, because what I would believe myself,
Yeah.
because I understand this connection to your soul, and through that you
Yep.
can connect to truth and love and God, because it is one line to the source.
Yep.
From the,
microphone.
from the emanation of the light, like you say, this conduit that comes to
Yep.
it connects is no barrier
Yep.
except physical barriers, mental barriers, spiritual barriers, but it's like it's from the same source.
Yep.
Material, let's say.
So all the matter of the
the-
universe
the
came from God
matter-
too.
Yeah. Okay, and what I mean is like this matter would be still particles or part of the only thing that exists, which is God. This is how I would feel it.
Yeah. No. God. The matter
Because
is.
otherwise, where is it? If it's not in
Well, if you
inside
listen to
of
my
God.
answer long enough, so everything God has created is not God. It's God's creations. God existed before God created anything. So,
Where?
well, if I knew that, I'd be God.
But God knows where it is, right?
He does, but in terms of understanding it, requires a huge amount of ability to receive love to the point where you have as much love as God has to understand how He come into existence in the first place, or if He even did come into existence. At the moment, the information given to us from God is that God did not come into existence. Now, how does that work? I don't know, but I don't know because I'm not God. All I know is that God does exist. God is an entity. God has characters, attributes, all of these self-awareness, all of these things. God wants to give me love. And the only way I can understand more about God, and by the way, God is the most complex knowledge anything about God is the most complex knowledge of the universe. It is far beyond anything that exists in the universe. The universe actually at the moment is not infinite. It's finite, slowly expanding, but finite. And when I say slowly, it's like expanding near the speed of light, but finite. Expanding, but not God. God existed before the universe was created, and God will, if the universe ever collapses in on itself at some unknown point in the future, God will still exist.
Yes.
Right.
And this I think is God.
Yeah.
all of this is God.
Yeah.
Everything is God. It's only
But
God.
no,
It's
the
only
universe
God.
itself
It's
is
only
not God.
It's only God.
No, it's a
It's no
creation of
spirit.
God.
It's no spirit. From Him, from
Well,
anyone, is
you and
the
I
entity, the big entity, the biggest entity there is, right? The only entity powerful enough to understand everything and
Yeah.
and go beyond our understanding,
Yep.
infinite or finite,
Yep.
and opposite to that, back and forth, no escape.
Yeah, but Menno,
Where is it? What is the material?
What's your issue
What is the
here?
compound?
what's your issue here? Why can't?
No, because
What?
why separate God from everything? If you-
Well, because
how
clearly,
do you-
if you look at
how do you
everything,
separate? Are you
you
are
asking
you
questions,
from
but they're not
God?
waiting for answers.
from
Yeah.
God? You know?
Well, you're making statements, and you want to force those statements on me, but you're not listening to my answers.
If you're saying that
So-
God is in everything,
There's little point answering it.
let's
isn't
look at everything. Everything is not very good. Not all things are very good.
Like if God was everything, that would mean your sin
Then
is
what
God.
is the other thing? This is what I want to understand. What is the other thing? What is it? This is
God
what I want to
created
understand.
God created things, and so those things are God's creation. They're not God, but God, you can see evidence of God in those things,
Yep.
but they are not God.
Correct.
And then we, as through that incarnation process, remember we said one of the biggest gifts you get through incarnation is free will. Then you get to create things within the bounds of what God has created. You can create things
Within
Now-
the laws,
within the laws, within the universe, within the,
and
physical,
you can also
spiritual, and
create things
emotional.
that break the law,
Yeah, you can try and break the law a
which
lot.
is sin.
And there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world as a result. Now, that's not a part of God.
And never
That's
will
a part
be.
of what we created. And that's a part of the learning process that God designed so that we could come to understand ourselves and come to understand love.
And what's the name of this space? This is what I want to understand. What is the name of that space that is not God?
The universe we live in, you mean? Or,
Yeah, for example.
yeah,
Well,
we could use that as an example.
None of the universe you live in is God. Not a single part of it.
And what is it?
It's a creation of God.
It's God's creation. So we
And
could
what
call
is
it
the,
God's.
what is the, let's say, the container? It's inside of what?
It's not inside, as far as we're aware, not inside of anything.
It's
It's not
of
inside.
God.
It's definitely not
It's
inside of God.
So it's like my thoughts are not in my head. Let's say that.
No, your thoughts are your creations. So of course they exist inside of you, right?
This is what I mean. Yeah.
Your
This is my
thoughts.
creation. It's
Yeah, but
inside of me. So
God's
how I
creations are not God's
can,
thoughts. So,
I would. I mean, it's a question. It's not like I'm really trying to understand in this case that if we separate the universe from God, was it container
Manu,
of God?
can I
of-
say something to you about, you say you're trying to understand, but you've got an emotional thing going on at the moment. What's the emotional thing going on?
What is the worry?
What's
about?
the worry you have? What's the fear you have? What's the,
No, is that I think that connection towards my soul.
well, at the moment you're not connected to it. You're connected to your intellect. So what's the worry?
It's not really a worry, but I think that for me to understand, or because I do
can I
believe,
explain to you
I
what's
totally
going?
believe in God, and I'm like so like fulfilled by it, and
Do you know? Yeah, but do you know what?
I'm
This
so
happens
connected to
a
it.
lot when we have an emotion of fear.
Yep.
We run to our intellect and we're like, I can't understand, I can't understand, I can't understand,
This
I
is
can't
what you're
understand.
doing.
And the fear is driving that process.
True.
And it's the fear that we need to deal with in that place.
That's right.
That's why Jesus is asking, what is
And
the
what would be a fear to? What would be to what?
well, it seems to relate to something about being outside of God.
I'm not afraid of being outside of God.
And then why is it very difficult for you to accept that you're outside of God? Conceptually, that's quite
Yeah, conceptually
worrying.
would be maybe it would be like
Can,
conceptually I would in the concept of God I would include, like you say, my creations are my ideas, and I can think as a extension of His love, her love, the love, because we are connected through
But you have to create that
line that you
connection.
connected. It is there. It is to everyone.
But this
It
is
is to
no.
everyone.
this is where not everyone.
And we're going to have to take the mic off you.
Yeah.
You're not-
Sorry,
You're not listening.
What is this other place then?
But you're just not listening to any answers, so we're going to have to.
But I just need the answer to where is this other place?
I've-
Is what I'm trying to ask.
I've already answered those
Answer that
questions.
question. Yeah.
The universe. The universe. That's the question. That's the answer.
Yeah, you could call it the universe. It's just God's creation.
But it's not God.
It's not.
It's not inside of God. It's not a part of God. It's what God created. Just like if you create a car, it's not a part of you. It's not inside of you. It's a separate thing to you. And for some reason, emotionally, you're very blocked to this concept.
Yeah, I think I'm not getting through my real question. This maybe what's happening. I cannot express it what I really mean.
Yeah, I think it's very common on earth for people to be attracted to the idea that we're all within God and everything is all good. But often
not.
we want that to get away from how bad things are really going. And we also want to feel that we are alleviated of the conscience of our own sin, and we are not.
Yeah. So all the things you create in your life, they're not God. They're not a part of God. They're not even a part of you, a lot of them. So even your sin is not a part of you. It's an extension to you. It's something that you bring to yourself. It's something that you pull inside of you, but it's even not a part of you because you can release it. You can let go of it and it's gone. So, the reality is every one of your creations, the majority of them are not you, just like every one of God's creations are not God. Yep. So that's the answer to your question, whether you want to
That's the answer.
accept it or not.
No, that's the answer.
Okay. And come down
To Jose?
to Jose. Yeah.
Okay, so if we are talking about receiving information from God, when we receive information from God,
Yep.
how do we know it was from God?
A very good question.
And because I already received information from God the first time,
Yeah.
and I was puzzled for many months until I found you.
Yeah.
But then also received information from spirits, and I believe, it's from the spirit. Now, how can I be fully sure that when I feel it's from God, it's from God? When
Yep.
I feel it's from the spirit, it's from the spirit.
Yeah, so now this question is not really about God. It's really about you, the humans, or you could say it's about the human soul.
Okay.
So how can the human soul, you, the half of you,
Yes.
work out whether you're getting something from God or you're getting something from somewhere else? It's a very good question, isn't it? Because you want to make sure that you're getting things from God rather than from someone claiming to be God. Because there's actually lots and lots of spirits in the spirit world claiming to be God. There's even people on earth claiming to be God, right? So you want to make sure that when you are receiving information, it comes from the right source. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah, so how do we do that? Good question. Any ideas? So do you have any ideas? What is that?
For me, it's emotional. The first time, it was a unique feeling because
Yep.
it was like I can remember the second that I didn't know nothing about it,
Yep.
and 1 second after I knew a ton of information that I puzzled myself like,
Yeah, but that
How
could
can
come
I
from the
just know
spirit,
this?
couldn't it? Because
I don't know.
the spirit has emotions. Yeah, you
Okay.
have emotions, don't you?
Yes,
Yep. And when you die, are you still going to have emotions?
yes,
Yep. So every spirit has emotions. Whenever anybody passes from earth, they go into the spirit world with emotions. And some of those emotions are sinful, and some of them are very good. Some of them are very loving, some of them are very unloving, but you still have them.
but you said that the information from God, the truth, goes straight to our conscience. The spirit can also put the information in our conscience straight, or no?
Not via the conscious, no, but
Okay,
they
it's
do
like
have
a conversation.
There are mechanisms in the soul that allow you to communicate with other people, and those mechanisms that come through in your physical body, they appear to be coming through around your hypothalamus, your base of your brain. That's where you receive most information from spirits. If you're receiving intellectual information coming from God is through the crown in terms of location. But spirits can feed information to you, claiming to be God themselves, and also they can claim anything, just like you can claim anything.
And
right?
spirits can project feelings at you to make you feel guilty, and sometimes people confuse that with the conscience.
Yeah. Yeah, so your question still remains, doesn't it?
Yes.
How do I know the difference? So let's so we remember these are our bodies, but I'm just going to rub them out for a moment. We just focus on the soul for the moment. So this is our soul. I'll draw that in the middle, I think. In fact, what I might do, I think I want to leave God's stuff there. So here's our soul, of which your attractions are?
Feminine.
Okay, so your soul nature is like this.
Yes.
Yep. So obviously there's half of you somewhere.
Yes, I already met her. Yes.
You already met her, you reckon?
Yes. That's how it started.
That's how it all started.
Yes.
Okay. That's how all this mess started.
Is it?
Yes, exactly.
And so this is you. So your soul can receive information from any source. So you can receive information from natural sources, like information about trees, like from the tree. Your soul has the capacity to analyze substances and understand them, but it's a part of its ability to absorb information. You can receive information from other souls, like, so me, somebody else, anybody, and it doesn't matter where they are. They can be in a dimensional plane, it's called the spirit world, or they could be here. You can still receive information from them. You can also receive information from the great oversoul, God, right? The universal creator. You can receive information from God. And the real question becomes, when I'm getting this information, how do I tell that the source is, what the source is, and whether the source is good? Now that's sort of two different questions, aren't they? One is, how do I tell what the source is? So in other words, we're trying to locate who or where we're getting the information from, right? And then the other is, how do I know the information is good for me? Because there's a lot of information getting passed back and forward on this earth and in the spirit world that is false. So how do I work out what is more likely to be true than false?
Emotionally, what we feel?
Well, let's look at the mechanisms you have available to determine that. Firstly, as we raised last week in our discussion with the group last week, there are primary principles via which you can determine whether something is true or false. So it's to where it inclines you to go. So if it inclines you towards love, it inclines you towards truth, it inclines you towards faith, it inclines you towards humility, and it inclines you towards taking action on those qualities, not just sitting there and going, let's learn more about faith, but you never ever do anything about it. You want to learn more about love, but you never actually take actions in harmony with love. Not that, but actually inclines you towards saying, Jose, take some action about love. Take some action about truth. Take some action about being humble. It inclines you towards that. Then you could say that the source is
God.
Good.
Yes.
Not God.
Not God. Good.
Good.
Maybe.
Not God. Good. It's interesting that good is one more word than God. It's just a human construct, right? But the source is good. It's motivating you in the right direction. Now, if the source is good, then can you see straight away a part of your problem is solved?
Yes.
Isn't it? Because the biggest problem you face in your life is if the source isn't good. Now, if the source isn't good, then there's going to be issues you face. Now, to give you an example of resolving whether it's good, if somebody, who knows where this information comes from, but somebody, might be Mary convinces me, or it might be you, Jose, convince me, or it might be a spirit that I can't see trying to convince me something. And if they're trying to convince me that I should not be emotional, Now that's against the law governing humility, because a part of humility is feeling your emotions and not dumping emotions on other people. That's a part of humility. So if I'm getting encouraged to sort of detune from my emotions through some kind of teaching, it's also against what I wrote on here with the human soul. The soul is constructed to be emotional. It's also against my connection with God, because I've said God has emotion as well. So it means if it's against emotion, then I'm not going to be able to receive God's emotions either. So if they're encouraging me to take action to resist emotion, then the source is bad.
Yeah, of course.
And it doesn't really matter where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad.
Yes.
So it could be I've gone to the doctor and I'm say to the doctor, Doc, I got problems. I'm having all these emotions come up all the time. And I feel like crying half the time. And I feel like I can't hold down my job. And I feel like it's really confusing. Can you give me a pill, which they call nowadays an antidepressant, right? Can you give me a pill, which is really a depressant in the sense that it keeps you locked up without emotion? Can you give me something to stop these emotions? Now, if the doctor agrees with you and says, yes, Jose, I'm going to give you that, then your request of him is not good, and his response is not good. But if the doctor said, Jose, you've got some psychological issues going on for yourself, we need to help you deal with your emotions, good source. We can be positive that this person has got my good intentions at heart. It doesn't matter whether he's God. Obviously, if we're talking to him, he's not God, right? If we can hear him in our ears, he's not God either, by the way. So if we're talking and hearing him, obviously not God, but his intentions are good and he's pointing me in the right direction, in a good direction. So that solves most of my problems. So the first thing we must say is that if a person encourages us towards what is good, then you could say we should trust them more. We should allow ourselves to listen to them and analyse what they're saying and make some decisions about what they're saying. But if the person is pushing us towards anti these things, then obviously it's quite obvious we should not be listening.
Yeah.
And if we do listen, given the fact that all of God's laws are governed by love, and we do listen and we do something unloving, it's going to be to our own detriment, right, if I do it. So naturally, very first thing I need to determine is whether the source is good, not whether it's God. You understand?
Yeah.
So a lot of people go, how can I determine whether it's God versus something else? And I go, well, that's not your problem. Your problem is determining whether it's good first. All right? Now, all of God's intentions are good. All right? So everything coming from God is going to be good for you. All right? That is true. But there are also spirits who are in harmony with God, that everything coming from them will also be good for you. Right? Any celestial spirit, any spirit at one with God in love, you can confidently trust their feelings and their assessments. Of course, the difference is God knows everything and they don't. So that's the only difference, really, isn't it? God's infinite.
Yeah.
God has infinite love to share. God has infinite information. And anyone who is also good, whether they're on earth or in the spirit world, they have finite information to give you. But it will still be good for you. You follow?
Yeah.
So that's the very first thing. Analyse by the quality of the information. So really what I'm suggesting there is look at the quality of the information. Examine the quality of the information. Is the quality of information in harmony with these principles, these fundamental principles that are going to help your life? If the quality is in harmony with those principles, then consider it more deeply and consider it emotionally, not just intellectually. Consider the feelings involved in it as well, because you can trust that the source is good, right? So let's say now we've worked out whether the source is good. Now we've only got 2 or 3 potential sources of this information. One is God, right?
Second.
Being the infinite source of good. The other is a spirit who is a limited source of good. The other is a person on earth who is a limited source of good. They are the really only options we have, aren't they? In terms of where the information is coming from. It doesn't matter so much what information is coming from where at this point, but if we really want to know, what did we say the mechanisms of the soul were? We've got one mechanism, which was the mechanism to receive truth, which was called the conscience, which is dealt with by me having an emotional longing for that truth, and then the truth can come from God directly to me about that thing. The other connection we've got is the love connection, which is based on the link with the Holy Spirit, right? So you could say the Holy Spirit is the other connection, which is via which we give love. Now, the interesting thing about these 2 connections is this. You can ask God directly, did I get that from you? And he can at the same time as confirming it truthfully, give you some love to confirm that it was from him. And then you'll know. But of course you've got to be sensitive emotionally to that. So you've got to have a few experiences with God first before you'll know that's God. But every time you get information from God, it usually overwhelms you. It's more than what you can handle because he's got more to share with you than what you can handle. Right? So it's going to overwhelm you emotionally. And you can get confirmation through those 2 mechanisms that it is God. Right?
Okay.
Now, spirits can't confirm, particularly through this method. Can they?
No,
They can't give God's love to you. So you know this whole idea that people sometimes have on earth of, I'm sharing God's love with everyone. No, you're not. You're sharing your love with everyone. It's not God's. God doesn't work through a human.
So when we receive truth from God, we also receive love at the same time?
Not necessarily. You have to long for it, remember?
Yes.
Yeah, but if I long for love while I'm longing for the truth, then I'll receive information through both sources.
Yes.
Then I know it was God.
Yes.
If I'm only receiving the truth but not love, now there's the conscience mechanisms via which I can receive truth, but there's also these other connections that the soul has to just receive information from everyone else.
Okay.
And after a while, you'll be able to tell the difference between those 2 sensations. But initially, maybe not. As long as the information is good, it really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But if you're worried about it being about God, well, then ask for more of God's love, and then you'll be able to tell.
Yeah, that is very easy to distinguish.
It's very easy. Yeah.
The consequences after. But the truth, it was a bit more confusing for me because I think sometimes I receive truth.
Yep.
And
from spirits, right?
Maybe.
Good
I was
spirits,
not sure. Maybe good spirits, because I was like in doubt. Okay, I'm not sure this is from God.
Yeah.
They were loving and truth and faith, so they checked all the 5, but I was not sure it was from God, and when I received the Holy Spirit, it's really like there is no doubt after all your talks, because for many months it was a complete puzzle what happened to me.
Yeah.
For more than 6 months I was just confusing, because I think I received truth from God and then Holy Spirit, and then I read like more than 100 books, nothing until you appeared.
Yeah.
And then link. I understood what happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the way you can tell. But it's if your addictions are involved, now it gets a lot more complicated.
Yes.
See, I can think something is love, but it actually not be. An example of that is whenever you think your wife loves you, when she gives you that feeling you're a great guy.
Yeah.
So that's not actually love.
No, not at all.
No. That's actually meeting an addiction. So if you could feel her love for you, she wouldn't need to tell you you're a great guy. You would feel that she feels you're a great guy, right? And also, if you're not a great guy and she feels you're one, she's got some problems, right? So if you're like not very nice to your children, or you're not honest with other people, and she would say to you out of love, she would say, you're not being honest. And that's going to make you feel like you're not a great guy. You just, someone's telling you you're not being great, and she's actually going to be loving you in that moment. Mm-hmm. So when you receive love from a person, it's not always going to feel good for you, particularly when you want your addictions. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is where it gets more murky. You've got to be really honest with yourself about your addictions. If your addictions are that you want to get things from people and not face truth, God's truth, then now you think what they give you is love, but it's not actually love. And anybody who does that is not good for you. They're bad for you, actually. Anybody who wants to meet your addictions is actually bad for you. But the average person on earth thinks, you meet my addictions and it's good. The average person believes. So now you have to start to be able to determine, don't you, what is actually love, what is truth. So that becomes a more complicated issue when you're facing your own addictions. Yeah. So this is why Mary and I have shared with many, many people for many years about dealing with their addictions. Because your addictions are like lies that you tell yourself, and they are lies that you want to attract from others. And these lies, you want them to be true. So you have a psychological bent towards them being true, because you want them to be true. And this is where it gets very dangerous, because many spirits are happy with you telling yourself lies. They're also happy telling you lies. And most people on earth are happy telling yourself lies, and are happy to tell you lies too. And you see it in every situation. It's like, we were in a situation this week, a guy saying he really likes us and the next day hates us. You know what I mean? Like, so an example of someone falsifying their love, right? Not really very loving. Because no matter what you do to me, I'm still going to love you, right? But if you really love someone, that's how you feel. I've had people murder me and I still love them. The first century, a lot of people murdered me. They're my best friends, well, good friends now. I still love them. They had to go through things, but still love them. Yeah.
But Jose, if you have a spirit come along, or God, if you're wondering, if this God comes along and tells me, you shouldn't be with this woman, you should be with that woman.
Which is actually what happened to you, isn't it?
Yeah. Does that sound
loving to you?
Someone who's encouraging you towards understanding your life better? Understanding yourself, understanding your sin?
No, on the time when that happened, I will not say it was exactly like that, but maybe yeah. But what happened is that I shared 100% everything that was happening to me with my ex-wife.
Yeah.
100%, and she was not able to cope with that truth. The fact that I loved unconditional some other person, for her was completely impossible, not acceptable. Yeah. And for me, I shared that. I didn't understand that at all.
So you
because I didn't even know that person, almost, right? So it was like someone that I didn't know, and then I love unconditional, like I love my body, like I love myself. And I took many months to discover what was that. Yeah. And so. And
that's a more loving process, isn't it?
The honesty part of it is loving. But I guess we see people who are told you shouldn't be with this person, you should be with that person. But really,
I was told like that by a woman also. But
God is not really in the business of switching relationships for you. God wants you to understand you, understand why you're in the situation you're in, and work through that in a loving way, which you would honest, which is a part of being loving. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's God. Because also when we love someone, it's not unless we've received a lot of God's love, it doesn't mean that we love everyone equally immediately. So if we have a feeling of loving someone immediately, that can often be spirit also influenced.
Love takes time to develop.
You need
It's
to
not
know
magical.
someone to love them. You know, you can have a regard, like a human ethical regard for everyone equally, but to really love Jesus, I have to know him very well.
But when you met each other like your half, that is not cannot happen like a spiritual connection also, something like that, or it's for sure spirit influenced. It is.
If you're coming from a space of sin,
You'd have to consider that it would be probably, wouldn't you?
Okay.
If you haven't solved most of your addictions with the opposite gender, which you have not done, and they haven't resolved most of their addictions with you, which they have not done, then what's influencing the decision? It's easy for a spirit to just come along and say, you're their soulmate, bang, bang, break up the marriage, whatever. And it's easy for you then to just go along with this pre-arranged thing that's being arranged by a spirit, but is it a good spirit?
Okay.
Right? Now, that's something you would have to determine. But can you see? You would need a lot of self-analysis and self-reflection and be critical, wouldn't you, with yourself to actually go, am I acting out of addiction here, or am I acting in harmony with love? Now, the problem with addictions is they're going to tell you they're very loving. Right? You know, a man who's drinking alcohol all day, you know, he's a drunkard, he's telling himself, alcohol is good. It's very loving for me to keep drinking alcohol. My own grandfather was an alcoholic. He drank 5 litres of port every day. Most of his entire life. He died when he was 56 from his kidneys and liver failing. But he told himself every day, this is nice for me. This is good for me. It's loving for me to go out and get my flagon of my 5 litres of port every day and to drink that. He told himself that. You can convince yourself that something's loving when you're in an addiction. And this is the danger. So what Mary's suggesting is you haven't experimented with the danger. All you've done is you've looked at the metaphysics of it all and the amazingness of it all and all these other things and been seduced by it to a large degree, but you're not looking at what is the actual what are my addictions with women, and have I dealt with them? And what is the new partner's addictions with men, and has she dealt with them? Because it took Mary and I, it's probably taken us a solid 12 years to work through that.
Yes.
And I had 5 years alone before that to work through that. It's not going to be easy working through that.
It's difficult.
Yeah. And so a lot of people who find it very easy, we are very suspicious of.
I didn't find it easy at all.
Yeah, I understand. But you can see what we're saying, can't you?
Yes,
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
And if we go across to here, over.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, thank you. I'm very happy to ask you questions. And my
What's
question,
yours about?
it's I think human soul.
Human soul? Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
For a person that's very intellectually driven, something like drugs like mushroom, LSD, plant medicine, ayahuasca, can it be a useful tool to get insight of its own soul? I ask you this because unfortunately,
I understand.
Yeah.
Where are you coming from?
I'm just smiling because there's this fashion to call it plant medicine, and I just think that's kind of funny.
That's
it's not really medicine.
I think it's plant medicine too, right? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the direct answer, no. Now, I can elucidate, explain further than that. The direct answer is every time you use a substance in order to get an emotional connection, you're actually avoiding emotional reasons as to why you can't get a connection without using substances. So when you do that, there are high levels of danger, spirit danger from spirits. Whenever you do that, so what I mean is this. And can I give you my personal example? I was in a state when I was 33 in this life where I was totally shut down to all of my emotions. I was just in my head the entire time, right? So I understand how frustrating it is for somebody to tell you you need to connect emotionally, and then at the same time you feel like, but I'm in my head all the time. Like I need some help to get out of my head. Or it's just there's a high level of frustration generally when you're told you need to connect emotionally, and then on the other hand, when you're so focused on your intellect and so focused on being driven by it. Right? So I understand the frustration. But no matter how high the frustration, I would not recommend taking any substances to overcome it. There's a lot of reasons why. But let's look at the influences upon you. When you take a substance, you are now opening yourself to other mechanisms occurring that are not good. And these, in particular, are spirits who like you to be addicted to substances and who also like to gain a connection with you by using the substance to have a connection with you. These spirits often have a sense of power, they want control, they want dominance over the person. There's all sorts of things that they might want in this interaction with you. And if you're taking the substance, you're going to be far more prone to that influence. So while it may have the effect of opening you emotionally, it's not going to be your emotions that you're opening to. It's going to be theirs. Because internal to your own soul, if you're blocked to your own emotions, that blockage remains. And there's no physical substance on earth that can unblock you from your own emotions.
It's like the lower hierarchy.
Correct. If you look at the hierarchy of your own self, you've got your soul, which is where the blockage to your emotions exists. And then you've got your two bodies. In the spirit body is your mind. That's where your mind exists. And then in your physical body, you've got the brain, which is just responding to the mind. And there's a silver cord that connects your bodies together that allows the mind of the spirit body to transmit information to your brain. And then a fair portion of your brain is only used for the control of your physical body. So in other words, it's used for your physical body's brain, primarily used to control your physiological functions, your nervous system, your cardiovascular system, your lymphatic system, your hormonal system, right? And all of these systems are controlled by the physical body's brain, responding to the directions that are coming from the actual mind in the spirit body. Now, if I'm taking a physical substance, what thing am I affecting?
Just the physical functions.
Correct. That's what I'm affecting. And when I take a drug, the way in which I'm affecting them is I'm enhancing some and detuning from others. And that allows a higher level of spirit interaction. In other words, a spirit taking control of my body. So I go through an experience. An amazing experience. Thinking that it's mine. But there's hardly any guarantee at all that it's mine. Because I'm already detuning from my emotion in my soul. And that's where my soul has emotion. Right? So if I'm intellectually using my spirit body's mind to suppress the soul, the emotions of the soul, how can a physical substance have any effect on my spirit body or on my soul? You can only have it through an experience, which is what the spirit is giving you.
So in a way, it just makes you more sensible to this kind of experiences. But I'm not a regular user, and I don't.
Well, I would recommend not using it ever at all.
But last time, this is what the message I got is like. I actually could see it's a very dark situation, just immensely dark. And there I saw, okay, maybe this is true. It's true that it is so dark.
Yeah, see, there's a lot of people who have these experiences end up connecting to quite dark spirits, and they share with you their experience, their life, their feelings, and their experience often is very dark.
It's not reality, maybe.
And well, it's not your reality; it's it is their reality frequently, and it's a very harsh reality that they're facing, and they have the experience through you, so that you share. But in the process, it makes you start to believe, doesn't it? Things. It makes you start to believe. Well, what if that's my experience? Or what if that's how I am? So if they give you a nice experience, you go, oh, I'm better than where I think I am. Where I actually am, I think I'm better than I am. Or I think I'm worse than I am. And both of those places are damaging to you, because if you think you're better than you are, you're not going to do certain things to progress. And if you think you're worse than you are, then you'll get down on yourself and you probably won't progress because of that.
It's not a good reference.
Not a good reference, no. So any drug at all, and by the way, I'm going to include things like coffee, chocolate, they are drugs, alcohol, as well as these more potent drugs, are modifying you physiologically in order to avoid emotional states, not the other way around. They're not helping you into them. Make sense? Yep. Now, some of you take these things regularly, and there's a lot who have emailed us. You know, we get thousands of emails a year, and there's a lot of emailers say, "What you say about drugs, that's not true," and not, you know, and okay, like when you hit the spirit world, you'll see what I'm saying was true. If you don't want to believe me now, you see? Yeah. So if we go mic here, and then if we have the other mic over, just keep your hand up. So.
Yes, it's referring to the conversation you had with Jose.
Jose.
It's Jose in Spanish, Jose in Portuguese.
Oh, okay, Jose.
And also what happened last weekend with Nita.
With
Nita,
Nita, the spirit we talked to.
Yes. So
we did some channeling last weekend for those of you that weren't here, and we talked to a spirit called Nita who believed in reincarnation, and he passed, and then he learnt that there was no reincarnation.
So it's got also to do with what you say about connecting and asking for God's love through the Holy Spirit. But Nita is not the Holy Spirit, right? And there was the question raised had to do with the love, tremendous love.
You felt a lot of love from him, didn't you? Yes.
And it raised this emotional response.
Yes.
And this response has been observed in many different situations that was considered to be connected to God.
Yep.
And so how to...
In other words, you consider them to be connected to God? Is that what you...
Well, let's say, I don't know what to say, but the highlight love, I don't know.
So you're saying... you've had that experience many times where you feel emotional, you feel love.
No. I've had that when I kind of go to this space, which I believe, the way you describe, might very well be the soul space.
Yeah.
And feeling overwhelmed, but I know it's not a low sadness. I know it's really somehow that the question was raised and it was said it's because you received love. It totally could relate to that. But how to distinguish a high spirit and Holy Spirit? It's just the only way we've got to discern where the information comes from, let's say, or even the love, is going to be through emotional response. No? So how to...
So just calm down for a moment.
Yeah,
because you're getting all panicky, right? And that's not helpful. But
no.
So you're worried.
No,
maybe. Yeah, you are.
Maybe
it's not a question.
Yes, to mistake where things come from.
Yeah, why are you so worried?
Because there is a true urge for a connection with God.
Yeah, but there's another reason why you're worried, though. There's a belief you have about God that causes you to be worried.
No, I don't know if it's a belief about him, because obviously things that are shared here.
Not a question either. It was
Okay, I don't know. There is this great, if I put it like that, there is really this great urge.
I agree with that.
To
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying there's a reason why you feel worried about this question now. You weren't worried about it last week so much, but once you had that
because
experience,
suddenly the concept of the name of Holy Spirit came, and suddenly I thought, oh no, I don't know.
Am I getting it wrong?
What?
Is it
am
about
I getting it wrong? Is what you're worried about.
What if I get it wrong?
What if I get it wrong?
Something like that. But it's also because a lot of things that are shared here use some words, and there is this need to really stay totally open, not to get blocked by some ideas that could be behind those words
inside of yourself.
In your history.
Yeah, something like that. So
but
it's got to do with his question. How do I discern that I receive?
Well, it's actually not to do with his question.
Oh, okay.
It's to do with your fear. So let's first deal with your fear, because your fear is going to stop getting the answer to the question.
Yeah, but to be wrong. Yes.
You're afraid to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So now let's look at how
not to be connected to the right source. So it can take many variations. But
what does the average person feel about God? You think of all the education on the planet about God. What's the education on the planet say about God? That is very punishing. He's like a great big overdriving. Yep, you. What else? What is it to say? If you get something wrong, you're going to get hammered. To the point where some religions teach you do something wrong on earth and you'll be forever tortured.
Yeah, but I feel this is no longer valid here, really. Those maybe they were, I can never.
No, I'm saying you wouldn't have your fear unless it was valid. You see, what a lot of people feel is that they feel like, oh, I left the Christian faith, I left the Muslim faith. The belief about God that they had is not what I have anymore. But it's mostly all happened in the mind, and there's all this emotion still there about those beliefs generally. And what I'm saying is, one of the emotions is you're afraid that if you do the wrong thing, that you won't be treated kindly. Now, for you to have that feeling, we have to bring you back to your childhood. You understand? Which tells me that there's unresolved feelings in your childhood where you thought you were acting in harmony with a good thing, and you got punished by either mother or father, and in this case, father, right? Yep. So that feeling then causes you to feel like this feeling is still inside you. It's been ignored for years and years and years because you thought you're over it. But when we start talking about the concept of God, it starts coming up in your questions. So that says that it's still there. It's still inside of your... So if you think of your soul as a container of emotions, the experience of your childhood of getting punished for doing what you thought was a good thing or what you trusted, this experience has left its mark on you, and it's leaving your mark on you with regard to your relationship with God. That's why the fear exists in relationship to God. Now, unless you address that particular fear, you'll find that fear drives what you're sensitive to from the spirit world. So when Nita gave you some love, you were very open to receiving it, but also it challenged some of this grief you have in yourself from your childhood experience, because it contrasts to that grief, and that is what made you cry in that experience. Now, that also says that there are emotions inside of you that you need to let yourself have, that you think you're over, but you're not over. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Now, those experiences are not God. And this is where you start getting confused. Well, I'm having this overwhelming emotion. I'm starting to cry. I feel quite overwhelmed by his presence, the Spirit's presence and everything. And yet, he wasn't, as you correctly said, he's not God. He was just giving you his love. Now, his love is pretty good because he's a ninth sphere spirit, and he's received love from God to get to the ninth sphere. So his love far exceeds anyone you've met here. Do you know what I mean, on earth, in terms of the love he has for you. So naturally it felt overwhelming. But also it's going to trigger inside of you feelings that you can feel that are in disharmony with that love. One of which is you're worried about getting punished for mistaken things, for doing things mistakenly. Right? And that's still there inside of you. So this is the soul containing some feelings that your mind has told you, because it's convenient for your mind to tell you, you're over, but you're not over.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular experience triggered that, and that tells you you're not over, that feeling. You want to believe you're over. Why would you want to believe you're over something rather than being over it?
To avoid dealing.
To avoid dealing with it. So that also tells you that this feeling is quite strong in you. You see, because it's something you've tried to tell yourself you're over. So it has to be a very strong feeling driving your desire to think you're over something when you're not. And that's the thing to examine more than anything else. So it's not really a question about God. It's really a question about, are you going to continue to tell yourself you're over things that you're not over? Now, everyone on earth, particularly people who go into spiritual pursuits, are very determined to use the spiritual pursuit to get over things, rather than go through the emotional experience to get over things. So what we see often when we're visiting places is we see people telling themselves they're over things, and they're not over those things.
No, I'm very well aware of the avoidance that can be used with spirituality, and really, really consciously trying not to go this way. But so I'm glad to receive this information now about this. And,
So just allow the experience is telling you, emotionally you're not over it, so that also tells you where to go. It also tells you what to do. I need to re-examine my childhood on a more open in a more open space, and I need to find the truth of my childhood to find the source of these feelings that I have.
Because it's really come up, hasn't it, as we've started to talk about God and the direct connection with God, God being an authority. And so then there's a worry that surfaces of like, who am I connecting to? But as Jesus said, it's very much related to obviously some authority in your childhood where you felt you were well-meaning and you were punished in some way.
So then can I still ask this question about once you receive love from Holy Spirit, how do you know?
We will feel a great difference between the two experiences. Anything you receive from a human is going to be far different than anything you receive from God.
So
But I mean overwhelm?
it will be more overwhelming than Nita's love.
Way more overwhelming than you're prepared for at this point.
And yet this overwhelming with Nita revealed a wound, so how to know that the overwhelming doesn't reveal a wound?
It will,
It definitely
but it will be far more overwhelming than the experience with Nita.
Okay.
God's love will,
You may cry for days.
until you're at
Well,
one.
that I have already.
Or weeks.
Yeah.
Until you're at one with God, every time you receive God's love, it will expose sin or a wound within you. That's a part of the love. It's an act of the love to reveal those things.
Okay.
Good. What's the time?
It's time. It's 2:45.
Time for a break, eh?
Yeah.
Should we have about a quarter of an hour or so?
Mm-hmm.
Good.